When I was growing up, my dad's oldest brother, my Uncle Paul, didn't live near the rest of my family. We were all pretty much located within an hour of each other out in Oregon where I grew up. But my Uncle Paul, he had branched out. He had moved along to another state because of a promotion that he got with his company, and he lived in Texas. I don't know about that, because it was the Dallas area. Do we claim them? You were born here. You were lost, now you're found. Then my uncle ended up getting another promotion and he moved to Tennessee, which is where he still lives. A couple times a year, he would return to Oregon for visits, and when that would happen, my grandmother would throw a lavish dinner party and fawn all over Uncle Paul. The expectation was that the rest of the family would make themselves available to be in attendance for this family dinner, and she would get really upset if we couldn't. We usually didn't have a lot of notice as to when Uncle Paul was going to be coming into town because of his work schedule, so on more than one occasion, we already had plans that we had to change so that we could get dinner. Then, once we were all gathered for the soiree, all my grandma wanted to do was to hear about Uncle Paul. We got regaled with what was going on in his life, how his work was going, his golf game, his fishing hobby. As a child, I was like, but it was kind of whatever. I was bored, but whatever. As I got older and into my teenage years and had a life and boyfriends and a driver's license, the drop everything and come running because Uncle Paul is home, now nobody else gets to talk at dinners, made me really irritated. Why should I have to drop everything for a family member that I barely knew? Why did my grandmother make such a fuss over Uncle Paul and not her two other sons that were around constantly doing things and helping her? I mean, really? Who was constantly changing the light bulb at the top of the stairs that she and Grandpa could not safely reach? Because, I don't know, this was a really poor design choice by the architect. Light bulb at the top of a staircase. You cannot put a step stool there and safely change the light bulb. Fortunately for them, they saved up all the height for their third son, and he was over 6 feet tall and could reach that light bulb. Because we were talking pre-LEDs, people. It went out regularly. And why didn't my grandfather rein her in a bit rather than let her cook Christmas dinner on steroids every time Uncle Paul came home? Where was that bland 47-bean heart-healthy soup that she was making all the time that I'm pretty sure she got at Costco because somehow it was going to save my grandfather from high cholesterol? Meanwhile, the rest of us had to dump pounds of salt on it to make it palatable, kind of counterproductive. That was the usual family dinner. Come on, Uncle Paul is not that cool. This is the man that gives me savings bonds for Christmas. My teenage years were filled with some fierce resentment back then. Gospel this morning also depicts some people filled with some fierce teenage resentment. These two brothers in the story are both likely teenagers. This story, the story of the prodigal son, is one that we know pretty well. Two main players, the older son, the good one, the one who stays home. The younger son, the one who wants to spread his wings and, I don't know, move to Texas, not change the light bulb at the top of the stairs. So, the younger brother is going to get a smaller portion of this inheritance. Not going to get much because most of it goes to the older brother. That's just how things worked back then. But he shockingly asks his father for his share while his father is still alive. This is a super weird move at this time. You would just not have done this. It would have been interpreted as him basically wishing his father dead so that he could get what was coming to him. But he doesn't just stop with his super inappropriate request. Once he actually gets what he asked for, he removes himself from the household entirely. Maybe this is because at this point, nothing left is legally or culturally considered his to use. Or maybe it's because he's branching out, seeking his own destiny, moving to Texas, Whatever. In the Jewish tradition, there's a ceremony for situations like this that's called the Ketsatzah. This had elements of being disinherited, but with like a lot of excommunication and shunning and shame included. The offended family would take a jar of burned nuts and corn and vegetables and would break it in front of the family home on the ground between the door of the house and the individual who had offended the family. And in case busted crockery and food el fuego isn't an obvious enough symbol to one about how unwelcome they are, the family and the community would then chant something along the lines of, "Chuck doesn't live here anymore. He's cut off from his people." Very nice. Ideally, this would happen if someone tried to return. So our story goes on to detail the philandering and squandering and wastrel life of this younger son. His lifestyle is lavish, and he pretty much just spends everything that he had. And we often focus on this waste and blatant disregard for his tradition and his unashamed lack of thought for his future. Shocking, a teenager was not thinking ahead. When we look at it, it seems pretty obvious that this son is in the wrong and that he should beg for his father's forgiveness. But his party boy lifestyle isn't actually the main offense. The fact that he asked for that inheritance in the first place is. That's the offense that was committed. That's where the damage with his family was done. Once he finally runs out of all of his resources, he begins to work for a Gentile pig farmer, which is literally the worst fate that a Jew could imagine. He is working with the uncleanest of the unclean. Eventually, he decides to return home and plans to beg to be a servant in his family's home because that would be a better existence than what he is currently dealing with. It's honestly a pretty big gamble because remember, Chuck doesn't live here anymore. He's cut off from his people. There has to be a pretty big part of him that is expecting that response, but that's not what he gets. His father welcomes him back into the family, running out to greet him, preventing that ceremony from happening. And instead of making him grovel and beg, he gives him a robe and a ring and sandals, which are all symbols of status as an heir once again. Then the father throws a lavish party for the son and his friends. There is no 47 bean heart-healthy soup being served here. This is the slaughtering, I can't even talk. He is slaughtering the fatted calf. It is Christmas dinner on steroids. And that's often where we stop with the story. The younger son was squandering what he had. He shunned and shamed his family. His father extended radical grace and forgiveness, just as Jesus offers radical grace and forgiveness to us. And that is an accurate, true, and honorable portrayal of the gospel. But it misses the entire second half of the story. The part that honestly to me feels like it's talking about us more than the first half. The second half tells of that older brother, the obedient one who went through life doing everything that was asked and expected of him. He was dependable and hardworking and honest and loyal. He earned his inheritance. When he learns about the party that is already underway and no one bothered to tell him about or invite him to, he's a little honked off. He scolds his father for not following the rules, for not saying Chuck doesn't live here anymore, he's cut off from his people, for letting that little brat come home with no demand for restitution at all. The father is gracious and offers that son the following blessing. All that is mine is yours and always has been. And that is where the story ends. There are two lost sons who were found by their father, just in very different ways. Two sons who were extended grace and forgiveness and mercy for their respective poor behavior. Do you ever identify with one son or the other on some level? That's not rhetorical. I think all of us probably have a little bit of both of them in us, which is why Jesus includes both in the story. At times we can be like that younger brother. We can be exploitative and selfish and wasteful. And at other times we can be like that older brother, entitled, self-righteous, indignant. Last week, Pastor Jeff introduced our Lenten theme of finding our footing. And he talked about that feeling that we all have when life seems like it is out of control, but then suddenly we find our grounding somehow. And sometimes that out of control, lost state is our own fault. It is of our own doing, because we can be destructive and hurtful to ourselves and to others. And we can be petty and we can be bitter. And both states cause us to lose our way and fall prey to unhappiness and anger and sin. The discipleship attribute or quality that Jesus is desperately trying to teach his followers is forgiveness. It's hard to build on much of a foundation if you are holding on to past mistakes of yourself or of others. It's hard to learn how to grow and to evolve and move on if you're fixated and focused on the wrongs and the faults that have occurred in your life. So Jesus is trying to teach that in order to find that footing, to get grounded, we have to let go and we have to forgive. We have to forgive others as we have been forgiven, and we have to forgive ourselves. As I got older and transitioned out of my self-important teenage years, I realized that my grandmother wasn't slighting the rest of the family by slaughtering the metaphorical fatted calf when my Uncle Paul came to town. For her and my grandfather, it was less about the fact that they were excited to see my Uncle Paul, even though they were, and it was more about the fact that they were excited that the entire family was together. My parents always knew this, which is why they would drop everything and attend that dinner. They knew it wasn't just about Paul. What I also came to realize was that my grandparents' generosity ran deep, and that often the things that they did and the way that they shared their abundance was a lot more subtle than those lavish family dinners a few times a year. That 47-bean bland soup once a week was a huge blessing to my busy parents who had full-time jobs and 3 kids. Honestly, if any member of my family was in need, all we had to do was ask, and my grandparents would help meet that need. The things that my parents did, like changing that stupid light bulb, was an act of love and service which was extended in response to my grandparents' generosity. It was never an obligation. And this is what Jesus was and is trying to teach. God does so much for us. God meets our needs in extravagant and in subtle ways. God provides for God's people again and again. God offers us the ultimate package of forgiveness, grace, and mercy. And when we act in response to this, when we learn to forgive and to let go and to move on, and we help others to do the same, then we more easily find our footing and see our path forward. Then we get to more fully experience God's abundance, and we get to experience it joyfully with love and acceptance and grace. And for that, I say thanks be to God. Amen.